everybody, and welcome to my garden, or today rather, welcome to my kitchen table. This is going to be part one of a two-part video that we are putting together for you to talk all about what you do when you need to go to a nursery. If you're hesitant on what do you do when you get to a nursery, where should you look, we're going to talk about that today. And then also talk about when you're looking for flowers, what do you want to look for when you look at the cards? You see people around looking at the backs of cards, having conversations, and we'll talk a little bit about what they're looking at and also what flowers I gravitate to at this time of the year. I definitely have my go-tos, but I also have some new ones this year that I'm going to try out. A lot of people I talk to are nervous about going to a nursery in the first place if they have no idea what they're doing in talking about plants. They think that they're going to be viewed as someone who doesn't know what they don't know, and that's okay. But in order to be a little bit more confident in walking up to a nursery, visiting different nurseries, let's talk a little bit about what to expect. So you need some flowers for your yard and you want to go somewhere other than the big box store. So you want to go to your local garden center or down into a bigger city for a larger nursery, but you don't know where to start. It can be very overwhelming. So typically when you walk in, and there's various types, you'll walk into a garden center or a nursery and you'll see separations. A lot of them, like my local garden center, separates into annuals. I know when I walk in on the left, I'm gonna have all of the most fresh blooming annuals on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, I'm going to have more of my shade plants and the rotation of perennials and begonias and other ground cover plants going off to just the close right-hand side. That is all under a greenhouse cover. And in the back, it goes into rhododendrons, hydrangeas, roses, trees, more of the outside plants. Now, other nurseries you might go to, it might just be mostly outdoors. So you kind of have to get a feel. Do they have a greenhouse? Do they have an area that says vegetables only? Some of the better nurseries out there will have very clear signs that say, here are your annuals, here are your perennials, or sometimes they'll break it up into here are your sun plants and here are your shade plants, and oh, and here are the trees out here in the back. So walk in, get a sense of what you're looking at, kind of feel around. If someone comes up to you and asks, do you have a question? Where do you need to go? Feel free to tell them, I have a sunny spot. I need something to bloom. Can you point me in the right direction? And 9 times out of 10, they'll be extremely helpful in getting you situated, at least to start looking around. Now, it is more than okay to walk into a nursery and just look around and absorb everything that you're seeing. Really get a sense of what the layout is, what you're seeing, what you like, what sings to you, really, because a lot of times that's how I choose my plants. But what you can do for your next trip, or what you can do even before your first trip, is pay attention to your garden. And does it get all day sun? So does it get more than 6 hours of sun? That's what's called full sun. Does it get some sun, 4 to 6 hours? And are those 4 to 6 hours, are they only in the morning, or are they in the afternoon, evening? Or is it more of a part shade area where it gets less than 4 hours, maybe less than 2 hours of sun? So pay attention to that. The windows behind me, so how our garden is situated, it's actually down a hill. So I spend a lot of time looking out these windows down at my garden and looking to see where the sun is going. So we've only been here, this is actually our 3rd full summer in this house, but I still spend a lot of time analyzing how much sun is that getting? Is it getting enough sun for the plants that I have put there? And I have moved things around. So it's really a lot of trial and error when you're trying to assess what to put where. But my biggest tip is to come with a list when you are ready to purchase or looking for help. To say, I have this area, and this is totally fine. I hear and see people do this all the time. I have this area in my garden. it gets roughly sun in the morning, but then shade in the afternoon, or it's just pelted with sun all day long. Or a common theme in my backyard is it is shade all day long. Come with that and say, I really want to get some plants with some height. So I want to bring some height in, or I just need something to go around the grass on a border, or I want something that is colorful, and this is my favorite color. Come with those ideas, maybe do a little searching online to see what colors you like, and then people at the nursery are more than happy to help you out. Let's talk a little bit about the tags in the plant and what people are looking at when they're looking at these tags in each of the plants. So if you look at the front, obviously you're going to get a picture of what the plant looks like. However, I would warn you, don't always judge the plant by the picture, because for instance, I have 2 tags here that are of the exact same fuchsia. So they're both Golden Gate fuchsia, and I bought them at the exact same time, but their pictures are actually pretty different. They have the same flower, but one is brighter than the other to make it look like it glows a little bit more. The other is a little bit more dim. So it really depends on when these pictures were taken, when these tags were printed, did they reuse them from past seasons? So take the picture as a guide initially, but take it with a grain of salt, because it could look a little bit different when it does grow, but it is a good place to start. Does it draw your eye? Does it pull you in? When you are looking at the front of the tag, there will be some information on the front of the tag, and every grower is different. So this tag tells me that it attracts bees and hummingbirds and butterflies and has fall color. That's fantastic, but it's not the most helpful for sure. Other tags may say full sun, and this plant gets to 14 to 16 inches tall. That's really good information on the front. So take a look at the front, see what it's giving you, but let's take a look really at the back of the tags, because that's where we're going to find the best information. So on the back of each tag, it's always going to tell you, is it full sun, part shade, or shade? And so this tag tells me it's part shade or shade. So it can get up to 4 hours of sun a day or less than 2. So I love fuchsias because I have a lot of shade in my garden, so I tend to grow them quite a bit, especially on decks that get some covered sun shade during the day as well. It's also going to tell you how tall and wide. So typically a tag will tell you how tall it's going to grow, how wide it's going to grow, and then it's going to tell you what zone that this goes down to. So this one says zone 7, meaning that it will be hardy and it will hold, meaning it'll come back next year, all the way down to zone 7. So I'm a zone 8B here, and I believe that means that we can get down to -10. I'll have to put it up, and maybe we'll put a quick blurb on the screen to show, but zone 7 is colder than my zone here. So I know that this fuchsia, if I protect it correctly and we don't have too harsh of a winter, it will come back next year, which is great. This also tells me it's long blooming. Many tags, I kind of laugh when it says long blooming, because that's always a keyword, long blooming. So what does that mean? Early spring to midsummer, or early spring to the first frost? How long are we talking about? Some of them will say spring to summer. That's a little bit more telling. I tend to go with plants that will cover minimum full summer. So minimum, they'll say early summer to first frost. My favorite are those that say late spring to first frost. That means you're just going to get the biggest bang for your buck. Most annuals will tell you that, but when you look at perennials, you just really want to take a look and where it's going to go, and make sure, if I'm only going to get blooms out of this plant for 3 weeks, like a lilac, for instance, or a forsythia, is that worth it? Am I going to be satisfied in that space with the foliage that comes after that bloom? So just be aware of the bloom time. And then the last piece on this card in particular, it says tolerates moist soil. Many times the cards will tell you if it is drought tolerant. Drought tolerant means that it likes to dry out. It likes places that don't get soaked from the sprinkler water all day long. But this one, this fuchsia in particular, tolerates moist soil. So you can put it in a place that tends to collect the sprinkler water, tends to be overwatered, or in the case of a fuchsia, is in a shady area so it doesn't dry out as quickly. So those are some key pieces of information on a typical tag. One other piece of information that's not on this tag that is on many tags is recommendations on the spacing. So many tags, this is the Proven Winners Pink Profusion Salvia we talked about. I planted up in a previous video. But on the back of this tag, it'll tell you spacing. Minimum 16 inches, maximum 20 inches. That's telling you that if you plant them 16 inches apart, minimum, they'll grow together, they'll touch. But don't grow them more than 20 inches apart unless that's the look you're going for. If you want them to touch and form a really solid border or a hedge type, keep them 16 inches together. But if you want them to be more separate, 20 inches or more really is up to you. But that's just another vital piece of information. I want to give you a sense of what stood out to me this year in the garden centers and what I actually purchased this year and planted in my yard. And I will go through the majority of them in groups. I won't go one by one because that would take way too long, but go through them in groups and talk about what drew me to them, why I picked a certain type of that flower or multiple types of the flower. If you can see this grouping of tags in front of me. And then in the second part of this video, we'll be out in my garden and I'm going to show you where I planted them, why I planted them there, how I grouped many of these together, and where I'm experimenting a little bit, because every year I tend to be drawn to a certain color or a certain type of plant that I really focus on and want to see what it does in my yard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start with the first grouping, and this is one that we did a whole video on. So you're familiar with my love of this plant, but it is the salvia. So as you can tell, I was drawn to many types of salvia, and there are many types out there, and they all act in a little different manner. They all are, for the most part, drought tolerant. They love the heat. They love the sun. So if you have a sunny spot, dry spot, a salvia is for you. In my area, many of the salvia types are perennial, so they will come back year after year, although they're not typically long-term perennial. So if I can get 3 years out of a salvia in my garden, that is fantastic. Anything more than that would blow me away. But even if I just get 1 year out of the salvia, they're big time performers in the garden. So let me talk about a couple of these. I am very much drawn to red salvia and purple or blue salvia as they come out. So what they do is they typically start as a small bush that comes out to about 12 to 14 inches tall, and then they'll shoot out spikes of colors. So spikes of purple, spikes of red, and that's really where the show is for the year. And since they tend to be perennial here, they'll shoot out those spikes in late spring, early summer. I'll have to chop them down, and then they'll rebloom later on in the year. So they're not a full spring to frost bloomer, but they will do an amazing job for you on the color. They also come in white. I did plant a couple white salvia in my yard amidst some purple and some blues, and we'll take a look at those later. But the last and my favorite salvia I do want to highlight is one called Hot Lips. So Hot Lips salvia can get so big and just so airy and bright pink with little bright pink and white blooms at the end. The hummingbirds love all salvia really, but Hot Lips has been my best performer in bringing in hummingbirds to my yard, as well as different pollinators. So the typical type of Hot Lips, let me take a look here. This one says it grows 24 inches tall. That's about right. I've grown them in pots. I put them in my garden actually this year, which is new for me, but you can do both. Even if you plant them in containers, they will come back year after year if you make sure that that container has good enough drainage. I had a couple containers that did not have good enough drainage, and I lost a couple of them this year because of that. Whoops. But I did find for the first year ever a new, and I don't know if it's new or not, but it's by the Sunset Western Garden Collection, type of hot lips, but it's called Little Kiss. And it looks identical to hot lips, but it is shorter. So it only gets max 18 inches tall. So instead of this massive blooms of the reds and the pinks and taking up a larger space, this one Little Kiss only takes up about 18 inches. So I'm going to try it this year. I'll show you. I put it in a container, and I'm curious to see how that one goes. The next grouping of flowers that I want to talk to you about on the annual side are begonias. So begonias will be everywhere in garden centers, and they are everywhere in garden centers right now. If you have a spot that is sun to shade, shade to sun, a little bit of everything, you're not quite sure what it's going to have for the day, begonias are your go-to flower. So they typically only get to about 18 inches tall max. Many are much shorter, and they come in a wide variety of colors. So they come with green leaves and pink flowers, or dark purple leaves with pink flowers or white flowers. You can get them in all sorts of different shapes. They also have different leaf types. I tend to gravitate towards what I call waxy begonias. I think I have a tag here that it actually says wax begonia. But those leaves, the leaves actually look waxy. They look shiny and bright. And those just perform the best in my landscape. They perform really great in containers. If you can get a really cool urn for your shade garden that maybe is a little bit on the smaller side, I have one out there, and put 3 to 5 begonias in one of those pots. Give it a month and that will just fill in, and it will stay there blooming until the first frost. And you really don't have to do anything to deadhead them, prune them. I give them a little bit of fertilizer every other week, but that is it. So I have been playing around with a few begonias this year, and I've been a little begonia heavy. So I think I've had to take a break. But I did try for the first time this year a proven winner's one called Surefire Rose Begonia. And I will show you in part 2 of this video where I have placed these, because I have placed them in 3 different spots, trying to see how well they perform in different sunshade combinations. So these do get a little bit taller. This is the Surefire Rose. There's also a Surefire Red, so it's a little bit more on the red side, but it tends to act a little bit more like a waxy begonia, but it doesn't have the telltale wax leaves on them. I just picked up some really other random ones, some white, an Ambassador Rose, a Cocktail Gin, yummy, and then one called a Dragon Wing Pink. So if you are looking to add color to your shade garden in something that's an annual, you can just change out every year. Begonias are a good way to go in terms of what you can put in borders, what you can put in containers, and they will just perform so well for you all summer long. Another staple in my garden every year are geraniums. And I feel like this is a very polarizing conversation with many gardeners. There are gardeners who either love them, and there are gardeners that just hate them. But I have always loved geraniums, and there are good geraniums and there are not so good geraniums. So over time, I have learned what to look for, and I would really, in your garden center, ask folks that work there to say, okay, what would be your go-to for this space? There are hardy geraniums that I have planted out in my garden, and those are my perennial types, and those come up mounded in the spring, and now they're just starting to bloom with little tiny flowers, and they act very differently than your annual geraniums. I go for the zonal geraniums that are going to produce blooms for me. I do have to do some deadheading on these. That's the only downside during the year. But the pop of color that they give in borders and in containers, it's really just a classic look. In the front of our house, we have 2 blue containers, and one of my favorite combinations to put together are white geraniums, red geraniums, and then maybe some diamond frost euphorbia to give a little bit of fluff to the pot. But then you have your red, white, and your blue, and it's just so, so pretty. So this year, I picked geraniums from all sorts of different growers. I chose some from my local garden center. I chose some from a garden center down in Canby, Oregon, that we have frequented every year at the Canby plant sale, but since it wasn't on this year, we actually went down to the nursery because we love their geraniums so much. And for the most part, geraniums want full sun, but they don't do well, I found, where if you live in an area that's really hot, getting really intense afternoon sun, they tend to burn. So if you are in one of those areas, I would make it so maybe it's morning sun for the most part, and then they're protected in the afternoon, or vice versa. If they can only get a little bit of sun in the afternoon, play around with the location. But if they're in full sun all day long and you live in a very hot climate, don't be surprised if they do burn a little bit. So just be aware of that. The next grouping that I want to talk about, and this is another go-to, we talked about a little bit earlier in the video, were fuchsias. Again, with adding color to a shade garden, fuchsias are so easy to add in to give you so much impact. And they come in all different shapes and sizes. Now, these are not the fuchsias that you see in hanging baskets. So these are not fuchsias that you see hanging over and trailing from a basket down from above. These are what you call hardy fuchsias, and they're hardy upright fuchsias. So typically you'll see them higher up and staked so they can remain upright. But the four that I have this year are a Funfair Wine Cape Fuchsia, and I have in some pots in the front of my house. A Sunshine Hardy Fuchsia, which is in my back shade garden. And then the Golden Gate Fuchsia, which is, I have 2 pots of these in my front patio, which gets morning sun, afternoon shade, and the fuchsias are going to be extremely happy. Be aware of the information on the back of the cards when you're looking at fuchsias, because no two are exactly the same. The majority of them will say part shade to shade. Some will say that they like more shade than part shade. And they're going to be all different sizes. These are typically 24 inches tall, 2 feet. That's typical. But they will come back for you year after year and just become more foundationally sound, and the number of blooms you'll get will just be amazing. So I highly recommend heading for fuchsias in your garden. If you like what you see here today, be sure to click the like and subscribe button, and if you want to be notified of new episodes, click the bell.